Okay, welcome back. This is video number 2 for UVs and buildings. And in the last video, we just finished making our UV, which is right here, of our simple building that was just really a rectangle. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take this UV and we're going to import it into Adobe Adobe Photoshop. And what we're going to do is add our building texture to it so that we can give a little bit more realism to our cube and make it look like a building. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and open Photoshop. And that'll just take a minute or so to open. And once it's open, I'm going to go ahead and create a new project. Okay, so create a new project. And the thing that we want to make sure that we do is we make this a custom project. We can give it a name. I'm going to call this Building 3 Texture. You can call it whatever you like. But the important thing is right here, our width and our height. And we want to make sure we're in pixels. So we want 2048 for both the width and the height done in pixels. Once we have that set up, you can see that it tells us that this is going to be a custom project. I'm going to go ahead and hit create. Now, if you remember with our export of our UVs, we also chose 2048 for the size of that, and that corresponds to this project, and that's important because we want those two to measure up as the same. Now, if I go to my file where I saved it under my images in my project, I can go ahead and click and drag it and drop it here into my project. And you can see again, it's just a simple set of rectangles and 2 squares for the top and the bottom of the building. Once I hit this in here, I want to make sure that I do not move it. It needs to be aligned exactly the same as how we exported it out of Maya. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. And because I do not want to change anything, I'm going to make sure I lock this layer here in Photoshop. So once I lock it, I can't make any changes or accidentally erase something or even move it or resize it. Okay, once I have that done, the other thing I need to make sure I do is throughout my process of importing other textures, I want to make sure that this stays on top for a while so that I can see these lines over the top of what I'm trying to import. Now what I'm going to do is, again, go to my files, and this time I'm going to go to my textures on my computer. Textures. And I'm going to find my building facades first. And actually, I think, again, I'm going to, you know what? Okay, we're just going to go ahead and keep this one simple. I was going to show you how to maybe put some storefronts on the first one, but that would require a couple different textures. And I'll do that in maybe the next video or two as we make the buildings a little bit more complicated and our UVs are a little more complicated. So what I'm going to do is, since this is a simple rectangular high-rise, I'm going to pick one of these 2 textures here, one of these 3 since they're longer, kind of rectangular shape. And I'm going to go with this one right here. You see the length of windows. I have some nice solid edges around the side. This one will be easy to work with and lay this down. So I'm going to go ahead and click, and I'm going to drag that into my scene. And it's going to be extremely large. So what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to turn it, and I'm going to shape it so that it fits into one of my rectangles. So now I'm going to shrink it down and make sure that I can align it to fit inside of one of these rectangles that are here. So rotate it, didn't want to do that. And as we get smaller, it's kind of harder to work with. So one of the things we can do is using the control and the plus button, we can always zoom in on our object and then can move it around a little bit here. Gives me a little bit better vantage point. What I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to manipulate this object to fit in and be in the proper alignment. Try to straighten it up a little bit. Push the sides in, both sides. Trying to line it up inside my square here. And that's about where I want it. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the Enter key, and that'll set it. And now it's in place. And the nice thing about this is I can now right-click and I can duplicate my layer. And I can go ahead and say OK. I could give it a different name. And I should be able to grab it and move it now without any effort and align it. So that it matches up to my other object. It's interesting, it's kind of lining up a little bit weird on the top and the bottom. If you want to, you can always Control T on it, and that gives you a chance to translate it again, and I can kind of move things around just a little bit on both ends to get it to line up a little bit better. And I think it might have something to do with I didn't have this perfectly aligned to begin with. I think that works okay. Hit Enter again, and then I'm going to go ahead and duplicate layer again and pull it down. Get it to line up. And one last time, I'm going to go ahead and duplicate the layer. Say OK. Again, pull it down and get to line up. Alright, so now I can Control minus and I can see what I have. And I think that looks okay. Now the windows are going to be right down at the ground level. I don't have any space down here at the bottom, but for this purpose, for a high-rise building, and we don't have any doors, but that's okay. This is a demo, and we can always come in and make some modifications to this and maybe put a different layer over the top of one or even this whole section of windows down. Create a door and stuff. But now what I want is a rooftop. I'm just going to go with this simple type of roof right here. And one thing I want to show you is that here it may be difficult to remember which one's the top or the bottom, and also the top and bottom of your edges of your object here. So if you forget, you can always bring Maya back up. And if we go back to Maya, we can take a look at our editor here. And if we go into edge mode, if I highlight it, you can see that this is the top. And what I have apparently done is I have aligned my building in the wrong direction. So I need to rotate all of those. I should have checked this first, but this is the top. So that would make this edge the actual top of the building. And then the top of the building is here. along this base right here. So that's the top, and this edge here along this side is actually where the location of the top of the building. So I need to now rotate my whole object here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of these and see if there's an easy way to rotate these. By selecting them all and using Control T all at once, it allows me to rotate them. And I've rotated them fairly easily, except I pull the mouse a little bit off. There we go. And go ahead and go in a little bit and make sure that it's straight. It'll be all right. And then this is the top. I'm not going to put a texture on the bottom because, again, the bottom is not going to be seen on top of the, or on the actual view. So I'm going to hit Enter to set my textures. And now I'm going to bring my folder back up, grab this, and drop it back on the scene. This gives me an entirely new layer, which is extremely large. So now, again, it's not set yet. Go ahead and shrink it down and set it up with my lines here. And again, I want to be able to see these lines, so I'm going to grab this. I'm going to pull it all the way up to the top. Well, first I have to set this. Grab my original UV lines, pull them to the top so I can see how they're lining up. You can see them over the top of everything. Select this rooftop here and hit Control T, and now it allows me to yet again come in. This time I can see my blue lines. With Control plus again to zoom in and adjust my viewpoint. And I can see that I need to bring this up just a little bit and bring both of these edges out a little bit. Enter. All right, so now with that, hit Control minus, you can see that I have laid out some textures, and what I want to do is I want to save this. Save my scene, and it wants to know where I want to put it. It's going to put it right back into my project, although this is the wrong project, so let's go ahead and save it back into my projects, my city buildings, and I'm going to put this into source images because this will become a source image, and it's my building 3 textures. And I'm going to hit save. I'm going to say OK. Now with that done, I'm going to go back into my objects here, and we could use the shader tool, but this is just a simple application. So I'm going to right click and hold on my building with my building selected, and before I do that I need to go to object mode. So I'm going to select my object, which is my building, assign new material. I'm going to assign this to be an Arnold AI standard surface. And then once I do that, this window comes up, and here's my base again, my color. So under my base, my color, I hit the little checkered flag, and then the file, and go back over here to my file folder, and now it's going to bring me up into my source images, and I want building 3 textures. I'm going to say open. And if I hit 6 on my keyboard, it should apply my texture. So now I have this texture applied. The side here I'm not thrilled with. It's not really as centered as well as I wanted it to be. So I can go back into my texture and I can fix that. But one thing we need to do first is go ahead and let's set up our preferences so that our PSD file, which was created in our Photoshop, is now directly linked to our Maya project here. So if we go into Windows and into Settings and Preferences, and then we go back into Files and Projects. Remember we did that earlier to set up our autosave. If we go down towards the bottom, it says Image Files right here. So Files, Projects, Image Files. Check this block right here. It says Automatically Reload Updated Image Files. And make sure it's checked. And then go ahead and hit Save. Since mine's already saved, I'm going to hit Cancel. And now I'm going to bring my Photoshop project back up. I'm going to go in and I'm going to zoom in on my project here. Slide a little bit over, and you can see that my line here isn't exactly even. I want to make sure that my sides of my building on the sides here line up a little bit better. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to grab this and I'm going to push it over a little bit so I have a little bit more width. And I think maybe the problem might be this image to begin with, because one side is wider than the other. Yeah, that's what the problem is. Sometimes run into that. We can fix it in Photoshop, but we also, it's a little bit outside of this tutorial. But when we grab our images, so what I could do is I could set one side here, and it's probably what I will go ahead and do is take this image, and if I pull it just a little bit out this way, kind of narrow that up a little bit, and then hit Enter. So it's just a kind of a quick cheat here. If I do that on each of these, now I will end up with some overlap over here, but it should be hidden pretty well because of the narrowness. Enter, and we'll have to take this a look and see how that looks in a second. Select this one, do the same thing. Now, if your texture ended up lining up perfectly and you're happy with it, you don't need to go back and do something like this. But sometimes you need to tweak it, and this just gives me a good chance to show you how the link between Photoshop and Maya works. All right, so let's this end down here. All right. Okay, so now with that done, if I hit File and I save it, it'll automatically save. And then if I go back to Maya, and I click on it, you should see that now the sides of the building have kind of slendered up on all the sides. Still not perfect, but it's a lot better than it was. And I do have this narrowness here, a little bit more, a little bit better. All right, so now I've got that done. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a ground maybe to just kind of show the process of how I do this. So I'm going to close this. I'm not going to make a UV with the simple texture that I'm going to apply for the sidewalk area and for the asphalt. For the sidewalk, what I'm going to do is, because I want to have a little bit of a curve look to it, and I'm going to just do this real simply, I'm going to use a cube, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to expand this cube out so I can see it. I'm going to also go to the channel block, or attribute editor rather, into my polycube. I'm going to change these subdivisions so that it's just nice and simple. Grab it, make it wider again so it's bigger than my building, and I'm going to thin it up. Get myself kind of a sidewalk height. Push it down just a little bit, or line it up with the bottom of the building. So I'm happy with it. All right, not too bad. I'm going to add the texture to it. Same thing, Arnold, again, standard surface. And I have a cement sidewalk texture that I've saved. And that's right here. I've used it for my other project. So I'm going to go ahead and grab it and hit open. And in this case, it's very large. I could go in and I could do the same thing we just did, or I could use this here, this placed texture 2. And if you click on the object, you'll see you go back to your AI standard surface. If you click on AI standard surface, right here on the little flag, and then what it does is it brings up the file, and it also plays the 2D texture. And here the repeat for the UV is set at 1. What I can do is kind of play around with this number a little bit and maybe say 5 and 5, and you can see that it's set my texture up a little bit differently. I'm going to try a taller number now, bigger number, and kind of do 10 by 10. And I'm going to rotate this, so you can also rotate your UV. So if I rotate it 90 degrees, okay, pretty much puts it back to what it was. Let's see, 180, of course, will do the same thing. But I kind of like the 90 degrees a little bit better, so we'll do that. And I've got it going sideways now. Kind of long, and it kind of looks like a sidewalk this direction, but I want a little bit smaller. So this is basically tiling. So what I'm doing is I'm kind of tiling the UV. And I don't have any tiles this direction, it's all just one length. This is a case where maybe setting it up as a UV might have been useful. And I can also see that I have a lot of reflection on these surfaces. So I'm going to go back to my AI standard surface for my sidewalk. And for roughness, I am now going to bump that up maybe to 0.8. And when I take a look at it, no longer shiny. The building, because I have a lot of glass in it, I might see what that looks like if I add a little bit more roughness to it. But not as much roughness as I did with the sidewalk. Just to kind of maybe get the reflection out of the roof top a little bit. Still give it that kind of glass look on the side. All right, so now for the asphalt. I'm going to use just a regular plane, and I'm going to make the plane larger. Right, and it's just kind of like that. You can play around with it, but you know, presumably this is a city block, and this would be the road that's underneath it. You can adjust the building later. And for this, I'm going to add asphalt. So again, assign a new material, Arnold, and my AI standard surface again. Back here to base and color, I have an asphalt file that I've been using. So I'm going to do that. Go here, and I have this asphalt road texture. If I click on it, you can see here it is. And again, when I open it up, you can see very large, and it's also rough or very shiny, so we'll have to deal with that in a minute. But first, let's go back, and we're just going to go ahead and play around with the tiling of it. And in this case, I want this a lot smaller. So maybe, okay, too small. If I zoom in, you can kind of see the texture of an asphalt looks a little bit better. Staggered a little bit, gives it a little bit better look. And now let's go ahead and take care of that shininess. If I click back on the surface area itself, I can go back to the AI standard surface and add quite a bit of roughness again. And now this is kind of what we've got as far as our building. And what I'm going to do is, now let's just go ahead and render it real quick. Give it a skyline render. If I hit play on Arnold, you can see that my building kind of takes on this appearance. And it looks like my road is actually well below my surface here. I didn't catch that, but yep, it is. Let's go ahead and pull that up a little bit. If you hold the shift button and push down on your middle mouse button when you have it selected for the move, that allows you to move the object up and down. So again, the shift button, middle mouse button, once you have the move selected, of course it would also work for rotate and resize, but since I want to move this up and down and be very close, but I can't see my control very well, this allows me to do that, my manipulator. All right, so let's go ahead and try that again. Let's go ahead and render it. Get set up. And as you can see, we have just a generic office building with glass. And done just that quick. So the texturing doesn't have to be difficult, and just something like this makes it look a lot better more quickly. Now, if we added more detail to the structure of the building and spent a little bit more time breaking up our texture to meet that detail, we could really give the building a lot more realism. But for a background building that might be in the back of an animation shot or down the block where you're not really close at it, you can't see the detail, this particular building would work pretty well. Okay, and it's also a good introduction to doing texturing. Okay, and I was about to end the video and I remembered what I had forgotten was, if you notice here on the model there's a blue line, and then on the rendered picture there's also a blue line right here. Forgot a very important step for part of our Photoshop. Once we had set our file, so it's all the way up here on the top, our UV map, that brought this blue line up to the top of the texture that we're working on. And it's going to stay there unless we hide it. And even when we export it, if we don't hide it, it's going to stay there, as we just saw back on our video, on our building. So if I uncheck the eye here, you notice that blue line goes away. Now if I resave it and go back here, you can see that it has now left. So if I re-render that, that blue line is now gone. That's a very important step. We need to make sure that we don't accidentally re-import the lines from our UVs. And it's a really simple step. You just uncheck the eye so you can't see it, and it does not import it back into our texture of our building. Okay, so now I'm going to end the video here, and we'll have a future video talking again about more detail and a little bit more texturing. Thank you, and I'll talk to you later.